Hello, everybody. Welcome back to another episode of the Ruby AI podcast. I'm Valentino, joined by my co-host.
Hi, I'm the co-host. I'm Joe Leo. Very excited today. I've got Kelly Sutton, who's going to join us in just a second. But first, Valentino, NASA has developed an AI nose, an e-nose technology that can help to sniff out things, including tracking the health of astronauts on long distance or long duration missions. What will you do with your first AI nose?
Bullshit. It's got to be able to detect bullshit.
It's got to be able to detect bullshit. I love that answer. I thought what I'm going to use it for is I'm going to use it to determine which car on the subway to step into and which to avoid, because that is a real bummer getting into the smelly train car. But I like the bullshit answer better. All right. So without further ado, let's welcome the CTO and co-founder of Scholarly, Kelly Sutton. Welcome to the show, Kelly.
Thanks for having me.
It is great to have you on. Known each other and been in similar circles for a long time. Love the work that you do in Ruby. And now we've got this thing called AI, which is kind of taking over. You run some pretty important software that I think could be described as software as a service. Would you describe it as a SaaS product?
Vertical SaaS product, yeah.
A vertical SaaS product, and yet you are still in business. How is that possible?
Yeah, and yet we still exist. In fact, we're doing better than ever. Don't believe all the headlines that you read.
I don't want to believe all the headlines I believe, but I do want to understand what is the thing that sets Scholarly apart, that makes it so that the next person who comes around and says, oh, okay, I can recreate Scholarly, in 15 minutes, and then I'll charge half the price. What prevents that from happening?
Yeah, so Scholarly is we call it a faculty information system, and you can also run some pretty sophisticated workflows off of the platform. So you can think of it like really just an HR platform for higher ed. So think like Gusto, Rippling, Workday for colleges and universities in the US. I think there are two things that really prevent folks from just vibe coding a competitor into existence. One is that I think colleges and universities are on this current track where they're trying to move away from operating their own software. It lasts like 20, 30, 40 years. Very capable, talented professors, usually in the computer science department, built a tool for managing some piece of the faculty lifecycle there. But they didn't understand the maintenance costs of that, right? And so a lot of like customers that switch to us are actually like turning off old systems that sometimes like predate the internet, which is always a fun challenge there. So universities in general are kind of like getting out of like, we want to like maintain software that we built that is bespoke for us. And then the second thing is we deal with like very sensitive information. We are an HR product. So there is like the legal, regulatory, security, and compliance aspects to what we do. You don't necessarily just get like a SOC 2 Type 2 certification overnight. That requires some time.
I think that's true. There's also a trust component there that I want to get into. But a quick sidebar, I think that is how Ruby luminary and my co-author of The Well-Grounded Rubyist, David Black, got his start. It was building applications that were pre-web and then web applications in the communications department at his university. And then came across Ruby at some point, and the rest is kind of history. But yeah, you're right. That story of software being developed and managed by just somebody who, is at the university and had an interest in programming is real. I like that. So you mentioned this piece with SOC 2 Type 2 compliance, and that's real. You also said it's a regulated industry. There's high risk there. And I think because of that, you could start to sort of build your moat as a business with the trust that you build up over years. So first, I guess I'd ask you whether you agree with that statement or not. That's kind of a softball question. And then the harder question is, well, how do you do it with your engineering team and with the need to, of course, move fast and service your customers?
Yes, I do agree with that. And I would also agree with it where I am on the other side. Like, I'm not going to trust like a 2-person startup running my university's payroll. Like, that's nuts. That's a objectively poor idea. And so I think much like with any B2B SaaS company that is taking on like a big piece of what their customers are trying to do, you need to find customers who are willing to stomach that risk appetite of, okay, we're going to go with these folks who have only been around for 6 months, 12 months because we are so desperate for something. And then as the company matures, we're almost 3 years old now. We've got more than 24 folks working for us or like in our orbit here. Those effects compound, right? It's like, well, they've been around for 2 years now. They've been around for 3 years now. These other, you have like the social proof of like other folks trust them. Those other folks seem to be doing really well. Maybe like the risk calculus is we're willing to take a bet on this young company, but there's still institutions out there where it doesn't make sense for them, right? And those are usually like the larger institutions or larger systems. And that's okay. We'll get there. We'll get them all eventually.
Yeah, that's spoken like a co-founder. Because, you make this interesting comment that I think is true. University shouldn't trust a 2-person payroll team that just spun up last week. But at some point, you were a 2-person team. And so at some point, you need to build that traction and get somebody to make the leap. So what was that story like for you 3 years ago?
It was not starting with payroll. Yeah, we still don't do payroll. Someday we might. It was starting with what are parts of the process that are important, but also something that you wouldn't mind going with a vendor for. So a lot of our earliest customers were switching off of like Microsoft Excel spreadsheets or like Microsoft Access databases for like tracking faculty activity data and like faculty rosters there. The ability to show like, okay, like a connected web database for this information is vastly superior because more than 2 people can work on this at the same time. Yeah, was there a pretty easy sell. So that's where we started, and then started adding to what we did, got into like more like workflow management. And then we continue to add functionality to like what we call it like our workflow engine. So rather than just being able to run a very simple process, you can now run very like sophisticated processes that have like 50 plus people involved for a single like run of this workflow here. And so we just continue to add to that. And all of that really comes from like just sitting down with customers or prospects and saying, okay, what do you need? Like, what problems are you trying to solve? Explain it to us in plain language. Like, don't tell us like, I want the button over here and I want a spreadsheet over here. Like, tell us like, okay, what is this process? Explain it to us in depth. And then we don't stop until they're happy and their problems are solved.
From an institution perspective, I imagine they have a lot of like departments, and it's not like maybe one person you're talking to to set these up. So how do you kind of deal with that from an AI business perspective to disseminate and connect all of the related parties? So you're not like relearning how a university works differently when you're trying to onboard somebody new. Or do you have like systematic approaches? Like, what's your kind of workflow from a business adopting AI and implementing AI? Do you have like channels set up for certain workloads to like line up your customers to yours? Is it that in depth? Do you have this desire to like jump into that kind of preemptively without knowing it? How do you handle all the trade-offs and balance there?
Yeah. Our platform has been built to be extremely flexible from day one. No 2 universities are alike. We're talking just like hilariously different sets of requirements. Just when you think this requirement, this is going to be set in stone, like the privacy, like this document coming out of this workflow, it's always going to be this way. I guarantee you the next customer is going to show up and say like, nope, we do it totally differently. So we've always been, I would say, like a very like nimble engineering and product. And then when it comes to like, how do we plug AI into that? There's a few things there. I think universities were very AI skeptical up until about 2 to 3 months ago. Now they're like very much don't want to get left behind, like extreme FOMO, really trying to lean into how they can like responsibly integrate AI into their administration and all of their operations there. When it comes to like how we use AI, there's kind of like 3 places that we use AI. We have surfaces in our product, everything from like a chat surface to like, okay, this complicated thing is actually being offloaded to an LLM for like building like the draft of a workflow, for example. So you can drop in a document, we put together a workflow. We've got an MCP server, which our administration team is using a lot for setting up new customers and guiding them through implementation. That's been a surprising win in the last few months here. Like we're building fewer administration dashboards and tooling and more, and just letting the LLMs and handle that. And then we also use it as an engineering team all the time. Like probably 80-90% of the code that we write has Claude somewhere on it.
So I wanted to zoom in on this, and I want to get Valentino's take on it also. I was reading some of the stuff you wrote, which is excellent. Your retrospectives posts are great. And you made a comment about MCP being useful, but likely temporary. I think you're not alone in that assessment, though nobody really knows. But I'm curious, why you came to that, not really conclusion, but why you came to that prediction. And I'm also kind of curious how that resonates with V.
I think it's fair to say that the three of us have been around the block a few times, right?
Yes. Brought up maybe a little bit too much on this show.
Yeah, I know. People keep mentioning it. Sorry.
Yeah.
You develop a nose for the things where like a new technology is introduced that solves a problem, but it has some echoes of the past of like, this technology solves this problem, sure, but is it necessary? No. Okay. Or are there things that already do this, or you're going to run into a constraint or a shortcoming? So I always like to pick on GraphQL. I've picked on GraphQL for a decade now. Similar thing, I don't think we need this. And I think at this point, GraphQL is, I don't know if it's dead, but it's just not really used as much as rewind 5 years. Everyone's all in on GraphQL, right? And if you look at what GraphQL is providing, it was some very useful stuff, like partial field sets, related resource fetching, the ability to issue one request and get many things back. But GraphQL didn't have a monopoly on that. MCP, similarly, it's a way of programmatically speaking with the web application. But we've had JSON APIs for 10, 20 years now. Those are well documented. If you choose a spec like JSON API, it's very predictable how you can interact with something. And I think a lot of just the early MCP stuff of throwing the kitchen sink in of technology when we're kind of just reverting to okay, this thing is kind of just issuing requests, and their RPC style requests is all right, I think for us as a business, we must adopt this. But if we fast forward 5 years and someone's yeah, we just stopped using MCP because all the models actually could write curl commands, I'd be yeah, of course. That seems like a perfectly fine place to land. That's my thought.
All right, Valentino, you've been sitting on his hands. Let's hear it.
I am so torn on MCP because from a efficacy perspective, models perform much better with CLI style discoverability. Claude code itself adopts memory, which is progressive disclosed via successive files, right? And it circles back to the whole hypermedia idea. To your point, Kelly, regular APIs, RESTful APIs are meant for that discoverability. If it needs more information about more, you can link to that in successive documents and kind of reflect that same. But I think a lot is lost on kind of the architecture of MCP from fruitfulness, that I think it's one of those things like GraphQL, where if you don't adopt it, in GraphQL's example, if you don't adopt it as your data delivery strategy, then it becomes very problematic in that abstractions and complexity kind of proliferate throughout the rest of your systems. And so that does complicate things more. But if you have things that need that complexity, it makes it simpler from all of your downstream services and systems. And that, MCP is the same, right? If you adopt the entirety of the MCP, it's got great resource control, great discoverability. It has a lot of things that agents lack as far as accuracy. But to your point, Kelly, do you need GraphQL for 20 page or 20 route Rails app? Probably not. Just automatically dumping it in any repo, maybe isn't a great idea, right? And I think the same way is true for MCP. Maybe you don't need MCP to just deliver tools to your agent. Start with an array or something very minimal. and then build up as you get there. But I think what we're seeing from like a scale perspective is that MCPs have a hard time with quality of delivery when the tools scale, right? So like if you get beyond the even 50 mark of tools, it starts to fall apart quickly and it like picks the wrong ones. It uses the wrong parameters, and like it becomes hard to manage the context and communicate that with the tools, right? And so there's a lot of stuff.
Are you saying this independent of how things are connected and whether you're utilizing MCP? There's kind of this threshold of tools.
Yeah. And, if you lean heavy into MCP, then it does that resource restriction and it helps like limit the number of tools, but it's still like a number of tools, right? If you have like a big domain, even for like, institution like a university, like it has all its own departments, and each department may have like 100 tools that it wants to use, but each one does a need for every task, right? Even within the domains of the larger organization, it becomes hard to like, well, what do you present to the model for a given user request? And you can get so far, but it still has its limitations. And so like, even if you adopt at a large scale and embrace it fully, you're still going to hit those limits. And so you end up having to build in different mechanisms to get there. But at the same time, there's like a whole like other aspect of MCP land that I think is often lost, of like prompt resources and other kinds of resources that you can make available to an LLM that can benefit your application. But more than anything is just consistency. So if you could just implement consistent abstractions like Rails has for a long time, that is better than the actual technical specification. Whether it's MCP or something else, as long as it's all like following a convention, it's going to perform the same, right? I don't know. I'm torn on MCP.
Well, Kelly, can you walk us through? You said that it's being used to great effect with onboarding, and it's replaced kind of building out dashboards, which of course takes time. And as you've already alluded to, every university is paying attention to something different KPIs, different requirements. So what does it look like on the ground? A new university or a new prospect decides, yeah, okay, I'm going to take the plunge with Scholarly. Your engineers, you have some forward deploy engineers that set up MCP connections, or what happens? And take us through it.
We have an MCP server, which is just for like administrators. So this is our like operations and customer success folks, right? And so they plug their Claude. We're using Claude now. Might be ChatGPT in 6 months. Like, I love being a consumer in a highly competitive market like AI right now.
Fits, yeah.
So there's a lot of setup that is required when onboarding onto a platform like Scholarly. And our admin MCP tools help us take like a good first draft approach of, okay, we need to configure a lot of things, what are known as like faculty activities on the platform. So these are things like publications, grants, service, like the things that make up teaching, research, and service in a university that are required to be tracked for things like accreditation or promotion or any sort of like merit processes, as well as like the workflows themselves. And good news is like higher ed loves like writing stuff down. And so there are a lot of like faculty handbooks out there. And so using something like Claude plugged into our admin MCP tools, we're able to take a faculty handbook and drop that into Claude and say like, spin up all of the workflows that you find, right? And the faculty handbook in detail is going to spell out like, okay, here's what the annual review process looks like for a faculty member. Here's what the tenure process from going from like assistant to associate professor looks like at this institution. And Claude will, as it does with our code, it'll like sit there and make a plan and then say like, okay, I'm going to create these workflows. Someone on our end says, yep, looks good. And then it sets it up in the app, right? We have a web interface to do all of that, but that does take hundreds or thousands of clicks because, on the 6th step of this 13-step process, this question on the 4th section of the 2nd survey should only be shown to folks whose last names begin with the letters N through Z. And so there's just like an incredible amount of detail that we have to like plug into these workflows on behalf of our customers. And that is something that LLMs are great at doing, or I guess these harnesses like Claude and Claude Cowork.
That's interesting. I see this part, and I see, you also do some CV import flow. And in both of those, it sounds like the human in the loop is by design. And I like that. Absolutely. So there's very, affirmative thing. Like we would never just trust it. Is that the case? Do you see a time where you can just trust it? And I guess what's the failure rate when your humans are going and verifying this stuff?
I think really in the last 3 months, these models are getting so good that most of the time when I see a model make a mistake and we drill in and we're like, okay, like why did it make this mistake? Turns out the source documentation was wrong, meaning it was doing the right thing based on the information that it had. And so that's a little spooky to me because previously it'd be like, okay, it got it wrong and it just got it wrong. Now it's like, oh no, there was a mistake in that doc and it just did what it said. And some of them are even highlighting like, hey, I did this, but I don't think this is right. So that's fascinating in that in some respects, it might be better than a human. But for the time being, and just given the type of software that we build to help me sleep better at night, I want a human in the loop, right? As much as possible. I think there's probably some interesting stuff that happens when the human in the loop becomes lazy and we trust it too much and we aren't keeping as critical of an eye toward like the outputs or what it's asking us to do. But that exists kind of like regardless of AI. That's just any kind of like management. If a manager isn't verifying the results or the customer isn't doing acceptance testing or someone's not doing acceptance testing and just saying like, yep, looks good. Like, yeah, you're cutting a corner. So not new to AI there.
Yeah. This topic fascinates me. I have so many questions. So I guess how are you like evaluating that they're doing their job? As much as a human can get lazy, AI can be lazy as well and kind of just like gloss over maybe details or like use the instructions that you gave it maybe overly so. Like you mentioned, like it may notice, but maybe it doesn't. Like where does that human sit as far as a quality control perspective for feedback, and like how are you like managing that aspect of things to just make sure like certain, right? What do you actually care about and test?
I take a lot of inspiration from receiving a pull request. Okay. You get a pull request that's a 10,000 line change. You are either saying, I'm not reviewing this, or you are going through it and you get through like the first 3 files and you're like, I guess this is good enough. When the human is in the loop, it's much better to like package things in a size that a human can consume. So I'd much rather get a 100, 200, 300 line pull request to review, whether from an engineer or a tool. And I think the same goes for any like business process as well. If you can't easily verify that the outputs are correct, then one strategy that you can take is like, well, let's make the outputs a little bit smaller. So in our example, rather than look at like the whole workflow that might be a 12-month process with dozen plus steps, it's like, okay, well, let's have it do like a step at a time and verify that as it goes. And then we also, as reviewers, we also get a sense for what does it do well? Where is it likely to make a mistake? Because it's all being driven by MCP, like there's just certain capabilities that we have built into the MCP server. So our ops or CS folks might file a ticket saying like, hey, I can't set what shows up in a select question on our platform because that's not available to the MCP yet. Can we build that? So just scoping down what you are reviewing and getting that cycle time up. So you're reviewing smaller things more frequently, I think is a great strategy for keeping the human in the loop and keeping them in the loop where they're doing more than just rubber stamping things.
So are you allowing kind of the humans in the loop to have access to AI tooling as well to help their work? Or is that like not necessarily part of it? And it's more, you focus the tooling around the pipeline that they fall into?
So the MCP tools look a lot like our APIs. And this is why I also don't think like MCP is like long for this world. It's like, okay, so we build some APIs and then we go build the same things into MCP and they're doing these same things, right? So me as someone maintaining this stuff, it's like, well, I would rather maintain one thing than two. But yeah, like our ops and CS folks, they're the biggest users of our internal MCP tooling for our platform. And it's really given them the superpower of doing things that would previously require a Ruby script to do something programmatic on the platform, to load data in or stand something up or move like an implementation forward. It gives them like that programmatic power without being programmers themselves. They're just doing that out of a Claude Cowork these days.
It makes me wonder if a .mcp format for Rails would be valuable here, or just any Rails endpoint can be an MCP tool. Yeah.
And if you look at how like we're organizing the code as well, it's like controller, MCP, both point at the same like service class or like business logic doer. And so thankfully those layers are pretty thin.
You've talked a little bit about, and I think we're touching on it here as well, that the idea of AI becoming an implementation detail versus a feature. And I think that's very quickly where we're shifting as an industry, right? Like it's becoming really rote, I guess, to say, well, we're doing this thing with AI. Like, well, of course you are. If you're not doing it with AI, why would we do business with you? That said, there are, as you've mentioned, you've got a customer base that has been shifting more recently. Started very conservative around AI and now is moving forward quickly. So in your words, what's the difference? What's the difference between AI as a feature and AI as implementation detail?
You got to look at the value. Like what is valuable to our customers or just any customer? The customer does not care that your Pentium processor clocks at 75 megahertz. Your customer does not care if your server has 16 megabytes or 32 megabytes of RAM. Your customer does not care if you're using GPT 5.4 or 5.3 nano, right? Or whatever the models are, right? Customer cares like, are you helping them make more money or saving them a lot of time? And I think in the last, since GPT 3.5, we've gotten a new tool to our tool belt, which is there's this magical probabilistic computing thing that we can plug into places, and it speaks in plain language. And so being around the block a few times, you kind of see like the arc of people being very like chat forward of like, okay, everyone's going to put a chat into their stuff. And we're kind of in this like,
this was a bad time.
Yeah.
AI development. Yes, I agree.
Yes, exactly. And then you're like,
this was a real bug.
Yeah. And you're like, well, are we a chat company? Like, no, leave that to ChatGPT and Claude. And so we're kind of like settling into like, okay, what are the new things that we can do that are very valuable to our customers using this probabilistic genie? And is that appropriate for the tasks that we are giving it? We've been living in like the discrete world for a long time as programmers here. And most of us has been trained on like, yeah, it either works or it doesn't. What do you mean it might work, right? That's a weird thing to get our heads around. And like, how do we need to change the products around that? Over time, I don't think we're even like going to be adding like the sparkles icon or like a chat surface. Like just parts of an application are going to be probably powered by a probabilistic LLM to help you save time or accomplish a task. And whether that's falling in like the fully discrete or more probabilistic area, like you won't be able to tell. Does that make sense?
I'm interested in this just from a business standpoint because I'm seeing this trend, the same thing you are. AI is first, it's too out there, people to understand it. And then, oh, actually, it's really exciting. So let's everybody make a chat, which is basically just funneling money into ChatGPT right through an API. And then predictably, smart companies started using it for implementation details early. But I bet it's still hard to resist from your salespeople and your marketing team's perspective to say, well, we're building this thing with AI. It's really exciting, which is something that's different than, well, we're building this thing at 75 megahertz, right? Which is a thing that doesn't appear on anybody's radar. But maybe that's all marketing and sales fluff, and internally you guys can just focus on what's actually working.
You need to do both. Like you got to embrace it. I think something that maybe like a mistake that I made in my career like 5-10 years ago was like actually not embracing GraphQL, to go back to that, right? I should have just embraced it. There's a lot to be gained with just like going along with the flow and like hyping people up and like, but still maintaining that like critical, like, what are we doing here? Like, what problems are we solving? So, because GraphQL is like a bad example in this, but when it comes to like a customer, they've been told like, whatever you need to do, go figure out how we're using AI in some cases. And so they were going to go, in our case, they're going to go look for a vendor that's like very AI forward or AI first. And so we're doing ourselves a disservice if we're not just embracing this. It's a good type of waste where we're just experimenting with stuff. We're throwing it against the wall, but at 1 out of every 10 experiments hits, and we're like, ooh, that is actually really useful. This like admin MCP was not something that I even predicted would be useful 6 to 12 months ago. And now it's like, oh, this is actually the only way that we do certain things at this company now. And you don't get that if you say, well, we're not going to experiment with this at all. You really have to just dive in and figure it out and know that 90% of the stuff you build or try isn't going to do it, but you at least get to be in that conversation.
You know, it's interesting because you've said this a couple of times, and it's now 12:15 on the East Coast. I've already had 3 conversations about this where I've heard anything from September and October, but no later than January of this year, where there has been some kind of sea change. It seems to be among the engineering set, probably this more senior or experienced engineering set, but it's also among, in your case, Kelly, your customers. What do you attribute that to?
Opus 4.5, 4.6, whichever one came out around that time.
Yeah, you get specific to the models.
I think it's the models. And I think, man, I would hate to be running like an AI tooling company right now, because you're just like, is today the day that I wake up and Anthropic like publishes a blog post and we're just like toast? I think their speed of execution, their focus on the enterprise market, and like they're kind of like the Microsoft of these AI companies, where it's like, no, we just build like tools for like productivity, like professional use here. We're not trying to build like an advertising company. And they've just nailed it with Claude Code. And they're like, okay, let's try like Claude Cowork. And like anyone who's not an engineer loves that internally. It's a very exciting time. And I think the models getting better just obviate all sorts of minutia that we might have been doing a year ago or 2 years ago around like orchestration and tooling and Claude MD files. It's like, well, if you just wait 3 months, like you can just delete your Claude MD file and you don't need that anymore. Like the model's that good.
So I guess the question is, do you find yourself being more productive as a business owner and like producing more value faster for customers?
I am, for the first time in my career, I am consistently overestimating how long things will take from an engineering perspective. Usually it's like, yeah, we could get that done in an afternoon. Like 3 months later, where is that? Now, I'm chatting with folks on the business side. I'm like, yeah, it feels like a week or two. And then like that afternoon, it's like in production, right? Without a bug. And I'm still adjusting. I still haven't found my ground yet. You're usually not punished for like under promising and over delivering. So might stay there for a little while. But it is just a weird world that we're living in here, where like what used to be the longest or one of the longest poles in the tent.
Yeah.
Engineering time is basically comes zero.
As that execution timeline tightens, do you find it your planning strategy aspect of things, is that changing the way that you do those because the execution feedback loop's so tight?
We got really lucky in how we set up the business and the relationships that we built with our early customers. So we're doing like every customer gets like a Slack channel. And we train our customers in like, you're on our board too. You are looking at the tickets that are moving through. You get to prioritize them. You are kind of doing some acceptance testing depending on like what the task is in front of us here. We're going to train you to get really good at high cycle time here, or I guess a low cycle time. So things that our competitors would say like, yep, we'll put a version of that in front of you in 3 months. It's like, okay, we need you to test this like this afternoon and tell us if this is meeting your needs or not. So like from the early days, we've been like optimizing for that really quick cycle time.
And do your customers do that? Do they jump in and test things?
Yeah. Yeah. And if they're not, there's a chance that we're not building something valuable. So it's like a nice lowercase a extreme programming, lowercase a agile extreme programming, whatever you want to call it. We're just in it with our customers, whole team, building, solving their problems there. So the LLMs have like shortened that, like, okay, it's going to take a few days for engineers to put that together. So it's shortened that part of the process, but there's still everything that kind of goes into adding a feature or something into the platform here. So that's always existed, but we've always tried to keep that pretty short.
We've got a couple of minutes left, and you did just mention this around, you got lucky with how you structure the business. And by the way, I really love that. I love that approach because I've done a lot of work with customers that expect a 3 to 6 month timeline. And there is, I think you framed it perfectly, there is a teaching moment there to say, no, we're going to release very, very frequently, but you got to be part of it or else we can't. I think that's great to build that in from the beginning. So I have another question for you, which is just zooming out. I love the timeline of 3 years. I don't love it. I think it's interesting that you've been around for 3 years, and that is sort of like very beginning / predating the release of ChatGPT to now where, so much has changed. What, if anything, would you have changed knowing that we were going to end up where we are right now?
I feel like we just got so lucky. I don't know.
What are you glad that you did knowing where we are right now?
I was listening to the episode of Mr. Searles on this show before coming on, and I consider myself a pretty particular programmer with some strongly held ways of doing things, but he might be the person
Until you talk
more. Yeah, he might be more particular than me. And so I think early on when we were just starting this company, GPT 3.5 or 3 was the model du jour, and it couldn't really do anything, right? And so we were still copy pasting Ruby code in and out of the ChatGPT interface. But we were able to set up the Rails code base exactly how I wanted it. And the model is very much like a junior or mid-level engineer. It's just going to copy what it sees. So we got to be very particular in how we set this thing up. And so now it just follows the patterns and follows some the conventions that we have in our code base. So it's just an extension of us. I think some of the shortcomings around AI that I hear people complain about is it kind of doesn't know what to do still with the 0 to 1. And it's well, yeah, it doesn't know your way of doing things, but we've got 12, 18, 24 months of history of here's how we do things here. So you plug in and get with the program, and that's been great.
That's a great answer. And little teaser for our next episode, we have somebody who's coming in who found the exact opposite. In other words, went to try to use AI to do a bunch of code gen on a legacy application and said, oh, wait a second, we don't want to copying these practices. We got to clean stuff up first. Right. And so maybe that is also a benefit of timing for you, right? You started in a place where, yeah, it was not mature, but you were able to get something out of it. And then subsequent iterations of LLMs could build on a good foundation. But in 5, to 10 years, when, you've had enough turnover and things are really atrophying, Deaf Method is great at modernizing and de-risking applications. Let's throw that in there. Hey, we've only got a couple of minutes, but Valentino, if you don't mind, I want to hear a little bit about ups.dev.
Oh man, I have so much to say about this, but the TLDR of it is in January, I decided to spin up my own OpenClaw, and
as did we all.
As you do. And what does it do? And I was very underwhelmed by code output that it made. I was just make a Rails app that does this stuff and use all the latest stuff. And I produced very lukewarm results. And I'm okay, clearly this is a context problem. Garbage in, garbage out is probably just making up a ton of stuff, and it has a limited context window and XYZ. How can I condense the knowledge chunks that it takes on each iteration of its loops and make more use of it? And all the main models are making training boot camps, and that's how they improve their models. And so I'm okay, what does that look like on a smaller scale? Can I just train it on Ruby? Can I just train it on Rails? And so I was okay, Claw, go use the latest educational science and what does a program look like to train you on using Ruby? And I was here's what I do, the rubrics, the pipeline. I was okay, that sounds great. I was so what do you need? And it was well, I need a list of materials to build the courses and stuff like that. So I went out and I purchased all the materials for that course that it would want. So that way, at least all of the authors are getting paid for me using the content. So now it's a distribution problem. Can I share this knowledge module? I don't know. future problem. So then it actually worked and it produced much better results. And so I just gave it more domains. I was like, all right, try Rails now. Can you build a Rails app and make something useful? And so it did, and it produced better results. And I'm like, okay, this is great. I get a bill all the time for these stupid domains that I own. And they're just years sitting, burning money. And I'm just like, all right, I'm either just going to get rid of them and just say, eat that burden and just that's it. Or I'm going to start making use of it. I'm like, oh, this seems perfect. Maybe I could train this model to make use and monetize these domains for me. And so I set up a product building training camp. And as a result of this training camp, it produced the very first product built entirely by a claw, I think. Maybe not, but ups.dev. And it basically took the business model of statuspages.com and undercut their pricing and then added a nice little feature, I thought, which was agent status pages.
Yeah.
So it built a Ruby gem to make it easy to monitor the health and uptime of an agent. And I went and added it to another site I built called Daily Vibe. And I said, okay, add this, heartbeat to all of your agents that you built for the app so I can know what the status is of all the agents running and operating this site. And sure enough, we have Daily Vibe's ups.dev page that will show you the uptime of all the agents that are running and operating dailyvibe.ai. And it's fantastic. I love it. I hope it's successful because if not, I'm going to have to decommission it and get rid of the domain. That's part of the but I think
part of the path. Yeah.
Better than that, it's more of okay, does this experiment work? Can I distribute these knowledge modules to others? And how might we be able to create these pipelines where we can start sharing and distilling knowledge in general? So we'll see. I have an article started. We'll see where it goes, but it's promising.
And you open sourced the gem as a result of this too. Ruby LLM UPS gem.
Yep. So there's now a simple one-line change you can add to your Ruby LLM agents to just include monitoring, and it will automatically give those heartbeat updates to the status pages. So your customers can know that, your operations are operational. Super fun.
Yeah. I think the best way to get people to use this is just threaten them with support Valentino's product so that we don't have to put ads in our show. We got to make money somehow.
Yeah, please do. My monthly bill is $10 a month. So I think just a few customers to that would make it stay afloat. So if you have $10 to spare
and you got some agents,
throw it at it and it'll stay up.
Underrate status pages.
That's right.
Well, okay. We're run up here out of time. Kelly, any parting words you'd like to give us?
Thanks for having me on the show. I really enjoyed it.
Yeah, it's great having you. Great talking about the details and getting into the weeds about what's working, on a startup that is maturing like yours is. And of course, we wish you all the best with Scholarly as a Ruby product. We're all rooting for you. And I guess we'll see you around the conferences sometime soon. All right.
Take care. Good night, Kelly.